If you're a small business or a growing business, how do you possibly compete and set yourself up to compete with a big business when they have all the resources, they have the money, they have the technology? How do we set ourselves up to compete and not be either pushed out, or if we want to be set up so that yes, someday we may be acquired, but how do we do that? How do we actually set up our business? How do we actually be different enough that not only can we compete with other small businesses in our market, but actually compete with the big businesses? Welcome to the Wealth Ability Show, and we have a great guest on this particular topic, and I love having our current guest on the show today because he has both government background and significant government background, and he has entrepreneurial background, and that is a rare combination. So Howard Wolk, author of Launchpad Republic, is Howard's book. Welcome to the Wealth Ability Show.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And Howard, if you would, give us just a snippet of your background because it's such an interesting combination of government and private.
Sure. I am lucky. I start out really as the son of an entrepreneur, and that's probably my main defining characteristic. I grew up outside of Boston. My dad was an insurance agent, and then he started a motor club that grew to become, quite a large company. I was lucky to go to some good schools. I went to law school. I was a lawyer in New York, and then I had a chance to work as a lawyer in the White House during the Clinton administration and work for Al Gore on reinventing government on that vice presidential commission. And then I came back to start working with my dad shortly thereafter because I really was inspired by him and his dreams. And so he and my brother and myself worked together for a long time and built from his starting as an insurance agency and this motor club that he started, worked together, and we've built, 5 or 6 businesses over the years that grew, into good sized companies. So, and then I had a chance a few years ago to go back to school, to go to Harvard as a senior fellow and research this book because I was really struck by entrepreneurship. I think it's the most powerful force in America, and I felt like it was really misunderstood by people in the academic world, in the policy world, and really in the general public. Most people think of entrepreneurs, a certain way, and they sort of box them. But the truth is, the dynamism that entrepreneurs bring, and the way they harness their energy to make challenge big companies, challenge the status quo, build. I just felt wasn't fully appreciated, and so I was able to have a chance to write a book around that.
No, I appreciate that, Howard. So we've talked on the Wealth Ability Show over the last couple of years about the war on small business, and clearly there's a war going on small business. Do you think that in the end, big business and small business can coexist? Because it certainly has seemed like business has done everything it can. It either acquires a small business or it pushes them out. Is there a place for small business in America?
Yeah. Actually, I have a chapter in the book, which I'm fond of the title that I made up, called Gorillas and Gorillas. And it really is about gorillas with a, Guerill, the gorilla, like guerrilla warfare, and gorillas, the 60-pound, 600-pound giants that tend to dominate industries. And I really think that's an incredibly healthy battle. And you mentioned the war on small business, but I think the war between small business and big business is actually an important part of what makes America successful. Small businesses, they have some advantages. There's no doubt about it. Low overhead, close to the customer, ability to control their teams in different ways, ways to innovate more quickly, and sort of general customer preferences in many cases for local people and being able to touch and feel and see and shake the hand of people. So I think small businesses have some advantages, and more importantly, or just as importantly, I think the dynamism that small businesses that move to that next level and start to tackle, bigger markets and take on the big incumbents is actually important because a lot of big, if we didn't have small businesses challenging big businesses, we would have an oligarchy in all these industries, oligopolies in all these industries, and people would get complacent. So I think this dynamism between small business and big business, whether it's a small business, classically small business, or VC-backed small business, is really, really critical.
But how do you do that? I mean, you think about it, the big business really seems to have all the cards in their favor from the standpoint that they've got the government behind them very
Yeah.
clearly. You see that in the new tax bill. They've got the government behind them. They have the technology, they have the resources. So, kind of walk us through a little bit about how do you see, besides the obvious, the nimble, we're close to the customers, but how do you actually set up your small business so that Amazon or Walmart can't just come in and push you out?
Yeah, I mean it's been tough. I mean that is a challenge. Although there are a lot of technology platforms that are actually trying to enable the small businesses in their war against the incumbents or in the war against the big businesses. So there are a lot of productivity tools and things of that sort, ways to get access to customers and things of that sort that actually will, I think, inure to the benefit of small businesses. And it doesn't quite level the playing field, certainly, but it gives them a little bit more access to technologies and some of the advantages of scale that the bigger companies have. And then I think you also have other issues. I mean, certainly it seems to me, during COVID, the virtue of small businesses and the local context was sort of an awakening, I think, to a lot of people because small businesses were able to come back actually pretty well, and their value in terms of being in the communities, being in the neighborhoods, knowing their customer base, being able to be nimble, really proved itself out. But it is a constant battle because the big companies, the big incumbents, and certainly the tech platforms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they see a category that seems successful, and they're not afraid to jump in and either take over the category or just extract rents in those categories that make it tougher and tougher. So it is a battle, but I also think in some ways the small businesses can use those platforms to advantage in the sense that if they get a customer, sometimes they can maintain that customer relationship directly and sort of um, preserve some of that customer value that they're getting. So initially they may come in as a supplier to an Amazon or a big platform, but they can use that as a lower cost acquisition tool over time if they're smart about connecting with that customer and staying that and building that relationship thereafter.
Yeah, that's an interesting relationship because you're almost talking about that brand relationship between the customer and the small business. The challenge is building the brand, but at the same time, you've got that personal connection with the customer that the big business doesn't
Yeah.
have. They may have the brand, but they don't have that personal connection with the
Yeah.
customer. I mean, you've got a few brands that actually the big business actually seems to succeed in that. Say a BMW, for example, that they have very loyal customers. People that's what I drive. I drive a BMW, right? Or some of these other brands. But then you have others like the big food services, like Cheesecake Factory and
Yeah.
those, and you go, nobody's loyal to that brand,
Yeah.
right? It's just cheap food and a big menu, right? Is really what it comes out being. But as a small business, and you're trying to grow, et cetera, one of the fears always I think of an entrepreneur is that they're going to it's a weird dynamic because we want eventually the attention of the bigger business because there are acquisitions that they're going to be the ones to
Yeah.
buy us out, right? If we want to sell. On the other hand, they sometimes they buy us out, but sometimes they'll just push us out.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, Amazon's been very well known to do that. Microsoft has been known to do that. Walmart's does that. That's their business model, frankly, is to push out
Yeah.
small business. And so how do you set yourself up so that you're both attractive, but you're not threatening?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in some ways you got to look across, depending on what industry you're in, and figure out where you're going to be able to compete, and really have a hard look on what industry you're in, what's your bargaining power or value proposition to the consumer vis-a-vis the big player, what's the industry going directionally, and how am I going to compete? It seems to me in industries where the personal touch matters, and I have, for example, we have a business in my professional business world. I have a home warranty company, which is like an insurance company that sends out plumbers, electricians, appliance, heat and air conditioning. Now, someone might look at it and say, "Wow, you have this company, and you have control all the shots because you kind of have the relationship with the customer, and then you send out the jobs and assign the jobs to the contractors out in the field." Well, from where I sit, nothing can be further than the truth. I need good contractors. And by the way, when we send out a good contractor who does a great job and builds that customer relationship, that customer wants that contractor. They don't really care about us. And next time they call us, they want that contractor. So So anything that has a human touch, that's one of the areas where I think local small businesses have a distinct advantage that they can leverage. Certainly in food, it's tough to compete with the big brands in terms of cost and some scale. But people have their preferences for sure. And restaurants is an area where it's a tough business as it is. There's still places where, for sure, small businesses can compete. Some industries like insurance, that's a little bit tougher. That people really like the human touch, and that's valuable. But you have to figure out what industry and how you're going to compete that way because people do like the human touch, but you still have these big platforms. So it does vary, I think, quite a bit. Toy store might be different. I mean, that's a hard one, but on the other hand, I go to my toy store because I got kids and they want toys and they don't want to wait a day. They like to go with it. So every industry has its own competitive dynamics, is what I'm saying, and the strategies for small businesses vary a little bit in order to preserve, but there are opportunities.
Yeah, let me give you an example. So my industry, I mean the CPA industry, right? And so we've got this huge acquisition, this whole huge consolidation going on right now.
Yeah.
And we've got a combination of things. We got big firms that are acquiring, and then we have private equity that's just rolling up firms, right? And which they're very different. But at the same time, when I look at it, I'm going, well, wait a minute. The customer loses every time. It's always the customer who loses. Yeah, the person who's selling the business, they do fine. They make money. They sold the business. They're all good. The employees are fine because they're still getting their paycheck, but the customers no longer get that personal attention of an entrepreneur, which is a different kind of attention. So I think the customers definitely lose
Yeah.
when small businesses get rolled up into these big businesses. But one of the challenges that I've run into, it's really interesting, Howard, is that I'll find that as I'm out there, somebody will tell me, well, I need to be with a big firm because my friend told me I need to be with a big firm. And I'm going, so what are you going to get from that big firm
Yeah.
that you wouldn't get from the small firm? And the reality is they're not going to get anything. In fact, they're going to get less from the big firm. But the fact it's a big firm
Yeah.
seems to make a difference. So how do you deal with that from a
Yeah.
messaging standpoint?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When you talk about firms, I think about law firms. I was a lawyer for a little bit. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers, and what's going on in the law firm world is just like that, which is the
Yep.
big are getting bigger. It's the medium-sized firms that are really having a challenge because they're the ones, they have overhead, they have staff, they have some, normally they would have thought that was a competitive advantage, but the truth is they have enough overhead that it's a problem,
Right.
but they don't have enough scale that they don't have to worry about it. And so what you see is kind of the barbell where there's a consolidation amongst the top 100 law firms in this country, and especially the top 20. They're huge. And if you're a medium-sized firm, and this is medium-sized firm even in Boston and New York, where a medium-sized firm could be multiple $100 million in revenue or billings, they're all getting squeezed out. Either they have to merge, and there was a well-known medium-sized firm in Boston
Yep.
that actually closed
Yep.
down. Whereas at the small level, people still want, at the end of the day, it's a personal business, law and accounting and CPA, and so the smaller firms that are nimble, that have lower overhead, that are close to the customer, actually are able to compete and hold their own better than some of the medium-sized firms where they don't have, they're neither big scale nor small overhead kind of context.
So now, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to somebody, and they said, the really sweet the really sweet spot for an entrepreneur is to develop a business that the big businesses can't do. In
Yeah,
other words, they actually can't do that work. So, in a CPA firm, big businesses can prepare tax returns and do financials just like small ones. So that's not that situation, right? But there are, like, I have friends that have 60, 70, 80-year-old family-owned businesses
yeah,
that they've just in a niche that
yeah,
is, the old niche will make you rich.
yeah,
And they're in a niche such that the big business, they don't really want that. They can't scale that business,
yeah.
but it's big enough for you.
Yeah, yeah. Or it's a market that's small enough that the scale that you can get as a small business is a competitive advantage. Like I could say we have a business that does this very niche financial claims processing for financial institutions. And it's a great business. It's a small business and it's going to stay a small business. And it was a market that was too small for the big players to really want,
Mhm.
but it was big enough that we could get a big market share and turn that into a mini version of scale advantages. So it was actually a good sweet spot where the niche was small enough that a small business like ours could own that niche in a way, or get big, 30-40% market share, add some technology and some scale at that level. And it's one of these things where we're a big firm probably doesn't want to get into it, and if they did, there wouldn't be any additional scale advantage that they could have that we hadn't already taken advantage of in the niche. So um, there are definitely opportunities like that if you define the market the right way.
Yeah, I like that. We have a tax advisory franchise, and I
Yeah,
think, we're small enough that
yeah,
the big guys, they don't even look
yeah,
at us. They don't care
yeah,
about
yeah,
us, right?
yeah,
But because it's a franchise, we have the economies of scale, right? Even
yeah,
though we have independent business owners, we have the economies of scale. So
yeah.
that's the kind of thing where I'm going, yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, and there are a lot of these things where like that tax advisor is a good example because you got the personal relationship. It's really integrated. You have to really add value, and you can add value. Somebody can't just swoop in and sort of add value. And then yeah, there are these networks and other ways that you can get access to up-to-date Washington information about all there are services that will give you essentially a level playing field with PwC in a way in
Right.
terms of or any of the big four or big six or however you want to define it, because you can get access to this information. Yet still, at the end of the day, whether you have your tax advice from PwC or a local firm, doesn't matter as much as the professionals that you're dealing with are instrumental.
That's interesting. So let's kind of, I'd like to jump a little bit to what's going on around this whole small business and big business environment. Because, I mean, you think about the founders of our country, they were all entrepreneurs, right? I
Yep.
mean, they by
Yep.
definition, they were fighting the big guys,
Yep.
England, right?
Yep.
And the big corporations, and they set up the Constitution to allow for entrepreneurship and ownership of our intellectual property, as an example,
Yep.
right? Property ownership, all of these things were set up, and yet what we're seeing is it almost seems like we're seeing a shift here to big business now. You got the big technology companies, you have the big retailers, and they're putting so much pressure on, and they've got the government, seemingly they clearly have the government behind them.
Mhm.
Okay, so how do you see this playing out? I mean, do you think that we can keep our competitive? What makes us different is that we have an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive. And yet, if you have the big businesses and government pushing the entrepreneurs out, then what happens is that you lose that. And now all of a sudden you're France, which I'm not saying France is bad. I love France. Actually, I lived
Mhm.
in France. I'm saying that France is not the US, and we don't want the US to be France. I
Yeah.
don't think the France wants to be the US. So how do you mean, what do we need to do to maintain that? Hi, everyone. Tom Wheelwright here, CEO of Wealthability and Robert Kiyosaki's personal CPA for over 2 decades. You're listening to The Wealthability Show, where we help entrepreneurs and investors make way more money and pay way less taxes legally. Before we dive in, there are two big opportunities I'd like you to know about. First of all, if you're a CPA, join me and Robert Kiyosaki this July 16th, 17th, and 18th in Park City, Utah at the Tax Strategy Conference. Check out the link in the description below. And if you're a business owner who's ready to stop overpaying the IRS and start using the tax law the way the wealthy do, check out the Wealthability Accelerator. Go to wealthability.com/bonus.
Well, we do have a strong, as you point out, a really strong undercurrent in terms of wanting to help small business. I mean, going back to the very beginning, and actually, my book, I talk a little bit about the American Revolution, and the big incumbent was the British East India
Right.
Company, and that was a lot of merchants, and they were getting squeezed out of the market. And in fact, at one point, because of some things going on in England, British East India Company was undercutting them in the price of tea, and that was part of the catalyst around Boston Tea Party and what happened at the Revolution, and a lot of the merchants sort of rallied popular support against the big incumbent of the British East India Company. And we've had that throughout. history in the United States. And even as late in the 20th century, I talk a little bit in the book about A&P. At one point, A&P was the grocery store was squeezing out all the small grocers. They were using technology. They had better up-to-date pricing information. They were doing all the things in a mini way that what Amazon's been doing, 100 years later
Right.
or something like that. And there's a big rebellion. Well, in truth, A&P now is bust. I mean, they're gone, and they ran their course, and they were overtaken by the next innovator that came in and took them down. Actually, things like the invention of the shopping cart, believe it or not, a small technology, ended up taking the footprints of A&P, which were in the city, and made them obsolete as people were moving to the suburbs, and the shopping cart made supermarkets, competitive. So there's always been a natural dynamism between the incumbents and upstarts. Although most of the upstarts tend to be small businesses that then emerge to become upstarts in a more disruptive way. But even amidst all that, small businesses still find there's always room. I mean, you still have um, lots of places where you have grocers and you have bodegas and you have places where there are markets that you can compete. Although it is tough. Now, for sure, the incumbents in the tech field in particular are, it's pretty clear what they've done. I mean, booksellers and things like that. It's really a shame actually. But there's a little bit of an upswing now in booksellers even. So people are still clamoring for, a local bookstore, especially one that sells coffee and use other models. I mean, you can't order a cup of coffee on Amazon while you're ordering a book, and people sort of like the idea of being. So there are elements there that fight back, but it is tough, and it's industry by industry, and really having a strategy with your eyes open, I think, is going to be important if you're going to pick up. I think you can compete in any of these industries at a local level, but you just have to be smart about how you're going to do it.
Well, the good news, at least, is that we do have this concept of equal protection under the law,
Yeah,
which means that a small business can take advantage of all of the legal benefits of a big business, even from a tax standpoint.
yeah,
Although it is interesting that even in this tax bill, we have some industries being singled out,
yeah,
right? So the service industry that's not the professional service industry, like hospitality, et cetera, they're getting benefits, right? People who work overtime are getting benefits.
yeah,
And then you have other people that don't get any of those benefits and actually are being punished like the professional service providers who no longer will be able to deduct their state and local taxes that they've been deducting for the
yeah,
last several years under the pass-through entity tax regime. Um, how do you deal with those types of government infringements on on your business that you
yeah.
don't have control over?
Yeah, yeah. You know what? It's maddening. I understand exactly how you're thinking, because it's maddening. I mean, I built, along with my dad and my brother, and now we have these small businesses, and they become bigger. But I definitely would look up and say, what's going on? Why is it that, these companies, five times our size are able to benefit with all kinds of things, even tax credit, there's a lot
Yep.
of tax credit strategies. I don't have access to any of that stuff. So why am I paying, full income tax rate, on our earnings, and other companies much bigger than ours are able to not pay any taxes. I mean, it is a maddening thing. I think it's partly just because the tax law is so arcane, and you have to at a certain size, not just influence from lobbying, but also just access to expertise, and enough complexity in your business and scale that you can take advantage of things that the ordinary person can't. And it is absolutely maddening. Uh,
Well, and
you
it
know,
compounds the problem because now you have, the rich getting richer. They have more money, which
yeah,
compounds, which then they have even more money. They push up prices. Asset prices we've seen have just been
yeah,
skyrocketing over the past few years, really because of the Wall Street guys and CEOs that make so much money
yeah,
and that they can't spend, and so then they go spend it on $50 million houses,
yeah,
right? That are not even their primary residence,
yeah,
right? So that all always pushes things up. But how do we deal with the policies? So you were in government
yeah,
during the Clinton era, right?
yeah.
And Clinton actually was pretty favorable to small
Yeah.
business. I thought he was quite favorable to small business. I actually find that some of the current policies, which you would think under Trump would be favorable to small business, are less favorable than
Yeah.
they even were under Clinton. How do you navigate all that?
Yeah, it's very hard. I remember from my experience in government, I was on this Reinventing Government Commission, and we had all these ideas. I worked in the Treasury Department and the Justice Department, and we came up with a list of 50 ideas to make government better and more efficient. And then we had to go in front of the congressional subcommittees, which most people don't realize how much power the congressional subcommittees have. But it's usually, the chairman and 6 or 8 members of Congress. Every one of them has some sort of vested interest in that particular topic in their home district. And the power that these subcommittees have is really substantial. And so a lot of good ideas just weren't going to happen because there was you could take 10 IRS servicing centers and bring them down to 4, but it so happens that the 10 centers are in the 10 districts of the 10 congressional members, and so good
Right.
luck trying to squeeze those out. But my point being that it is interesting how much a call or organized group to the right person in the various subcommittees can make a difference, a surprising difference, because oftentimes it's representatives that don't get the same degree of attention on sort of the big issues, but you can really do some effective targeted lobbying around particular issues that are problematic. Doesn't always work, especially if they're getting contributions and influence from the big boys that are trying to initiate something in their advantage. But if you can be very very surgical in terms of how you look at the points of leverage, sometimes you can, I think, help forestall some of these things. The whole notion of small business associations and things of this sort really go a long way because it's a powerful group and it has its power, but it could probably be brought to bear a little more effectively, kind of topic by topic, than I think it has been so
Yeah,
far.
it's a couple of, I think, examples of what you're talking about. The state and local tax deduction. So
Yeah,
we've got a couple of people in Congress from your part of the world,
yeah,
frankly, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, that they
yeah,
are just absolutely, we've got to increase the state and local tax deduction, which in my mind makes no tax policy sense whatsoever. It's a terrible policy to deduct any of it.
hmm,
And yet they're, that clearly their constituents have said, hey, this is a problem. And there's been some grassroots on it. Another example is the 20% small business deduction, right? Qualified business income
yeah,
deduction, which that's actually being made permanent under this
mhm,
bill. So
yeah,
you have something that is a huge benefit to small business. And there
yeah,
must have been some conversations somewhere along the
yeah.
line to get that
Yeah.
done.
I think sentiment is very strongly in favor of small business. I think the organization around small business and the clout that it wields is probably underutilized. Just because it's so disparate, there's so many. I mean, the National Association of Realtors certainly has a lot of power. They're a trade group that seems to have done a pretty good job to organize themselves. But I think in dairy there are places, but some industries have big players in them too. So it
Right.
really varies industry by industry. But that's why restaurants I think have a pretty strong lobby, although it could be even stronger.
Yeah, what we
Um,
know is the accounting profession has a really terrible lobby.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that we know for sure. So what are some things that you think that entrepreneurs ought to be doing right now when there is this, there's a lot of pressure on small businesses. What are some steps we can take in order to insulate us from the pressures of the big business or make sure that we're seeing things that we need to see, the trends in the marketplace, et cetera, so that we're not surprised and pushed out.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I think a lot of it ends up going industry by industry. It's going to be because I think that the strategies and the tactics for small businesses to succeed would vary by them. So, in restaurants certainly have one different set of lenses, I think, than accounting, than law, than HVAC or plumbers, electricians, appliance or real estate. I think every one of them do have different dynamics. They have different incumbents that are there. They have different upstarts that are tech upstarts that are transforming the industry. They have different customer changes in behavior. They have different tools to work with. So it's almost like I would look at it industry by industry trade groups and see whether or not those industry trade groups are understanding them in a real way that they're carrying the clout that they have. Are they rallying the members? Are they positioning the issues the right way? And are they targeting the right people in Congress to the extent they're looking for legislative assistance? And then there's the whole set of business strategies that are intended to each one, where you have to kind of read the tea leaves, figure out where the puck is going, figure out what tools they have, figure out what technologies they can leverage to stay ahead, figure out what disruptions are happening that might create a window of opportunity for them. So things, I mentioned like the shopping cart happens and all of a sudden
Right.
supermarkets are interesting, but we see that now all the time in every industry. New technologies are a catalyst for opportunities. Typically, the venture-backed firms step in more quickly, but there's no reason small businesses can't step into those things. I mean, I just see a lot of small businesses become more and more nimble using payment systems and using marketing systems and digital marketing and other ways to leverage. So you got to be on your toes and figure out where there's an opportunity to do more. And so I don't think it's a one size fits all, but there are similar common tools that I think are going to be required regardless of what industry a small business operates in.
I like that. So I'm hearing a couple of things. One is that look at those technologies because they do tend to filter down
Yeah.
to the small business, right? They may start in the big business, but they
Yeah.
filter to AI as an example, right? Filtered very quickly to the small
Yeah.
business. And look at those technologies that we can use
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur in order to more easily compete and not have the overhead that the big
Yeah.
business and really take advantage of our strengths, which is being nimble,
Yeah.
low overhead, et cetera. And then the other thing I hear you saying, Howard, which is I think a really important point is to get involved with your trade organization and really
Yeah.
make sure that, hey, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? I mean, I can point a finger at myself. I'm going, hey, I complain a lot about the AICPA, my trade organization, and yet I'm not involved in it. So
Mhm.
I'm actually have gone outside that trade organization to try to influence as opposed to within the trade organization. But at the same time, those organizations, like you said, that's maybe one of the weaknesses that we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
is that organized labor within entrepreneurship is not as organized
Yeah.
as
I
it
mean,
is as
yeah.
it is within big companies, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I love all the lobbying in Washington, but it is true that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and they are the ones that are there. And it's not just that they have the relationships, but they are really articulating the lens. And so I would make sure that whatever trade group is relevant to your industry, they're taking a small business lens on some of these things rather than just representing the big
Right.
players in an industry. So I think that's probably what happens is the trade groups are are mono are
They are heavily
homogenous,
influenced.
but they're representing the big
Yep.
players within an
Yep.
industry, and are they really
No
representing the
question.
small businesses?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is one of the issues that the big four accounting firms pretty much dominate
Yeah,
the AICPA, and so they're not worried about the small guy, and so we kind of have to go to someplace else, like our Chamber of Commerce, like the chambers of commerce, places like that can that will actually listen to us. So that's really interesting. And then of course there's always, like you said, calling your congressman, right? Because
yeah,
a few good place words actually, if you get enough
yeah,
people calling, then they will actually make an impact.
yeah.
Um,
An interesting industry as we talk is wealth management because you got the big players, but actually, I think these big brokers are the big brokerage wirehouses are under a lot of pressure
yeah,
because smart wealth managers at a local level can get access to global level tools,
yeah,
global level information, and still have that personal relationship. And I think when it comes to people's resources, they want to be able to sit down, they want it explained, and they don't really care what the logo is on the door. What they really care is the kind of quality input, especially since it has leveled the playing field. I think you can get as good advice from a local
Oh,
wealth
for
manager
sure.
and you can from a big brokerage firm that oftentimes are actually hawking just the
Right.
brokerage firm's products.
Yeah,
So
I
there's
think you
lots of,
actually get better advice, and
yeah.
I'm like you. I think entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of the world, frankly, and certainly what makes the U.S. Great. What makes U.S. different from the rest of the world is our level of entrepreneurship. The book is Launchpad Republic, Howard Wolk. Howard, where would people get more about you and what you're doing?
There's a website with launchpadrepublic.com. If you like, the book's available on all the online everywhere. It's at some local bookstores. I'd love to see more local bookstores carry it. So walk into the local bookstore and tell them to order a couple copies and put it on the shelf. Um, and it was a lot of fun to write. I mean, I really do believe that it is the legal system in the United States, the political system, the rule of law, the way we're set up is so different than anywhere else in the world. Even the big developed worlds like the UK and Germany and Japan and France, it's a different ball game. We have a unique system that allows you to compete, and there's always ways to compete. And I think you do that and add value. This is the best place in the world to do it. So,
I love it, Howard. It's gorillas versus gorillas.
yep,
And that's what it comes down to. And the U.S. we beat the big guys with warfare. There's no reason we can't do that as entrepreneurs. And we have the advantage of being nimble. We have the advantage of we are constantly innovating, and we have tools that we've never had before.
yep,
Certainly, technology is way cheaper to build technology now because we
yep,
have the AI
sure,
tools to help us build
yeah,
technology, right?
yep,
So there's so many advantages to being an entrepreneur. My recommendation: don't get discouraged. It's tough to be an entrepreneur. It's not something that is for the faint of heart. But like Howard says, this is the Launchpad Republic. That's what the
yep,
U.S. is, and let's push that out there. Let's support our fellow entrepreneurs, and let's make sure that our government representatives, frankly, know where we're coming from. And when we do all that, what we'll always end up with is way more money and way
mm,
less tax. We'll see y'all
mm.
next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Wealthability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealthability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.